Hi everybody. Welcome to the Post-Post-Race Debrief. We're coming back after a long summer break. And before we kick things right off, which is talking about the stuff that happened on track and then we're off track, I just want to know, Niharika, how was your summer break and what did you do?
Well, my summer break was like more of a monsoon break back home. Honestly, it was just getting back to gym routine. I guess when we live out of our suitcases and we're flying around the globe, I think the part that takes a hit is your fitness routine, and you want to get that back. So I think I got 3 weeks of exercising a bit and just getting into shape. And yeah, planning the whole remaining calendar. There's a lot of travel happening. There are a lot of hotels to book, flights to do, and so on and so forth. So I guess my summer break was not as, it was not, it wasn't a holiday. I was just relaxing back in my hometown.
It's this time for you to sort of come back to Formula One because I know that the season's heating up like crazy and you're also set to travel quite a bit. Did you kind of
Yes.
did you back off? Did you see any news that happened over the summer break?
I mean, over the summer break, obviously, I had to back off. It wasn't like we weren't working because a lot of drivers got announced. You had Carlos signing to Williams and Ocon to Haas. So it was very active on the driver market. And we almost left Belgium being told that Sergio might be axed. And then now we are obviously seeing a post summer break driver change, but not with Red Bull. And yes, there's all this speculation and these stories that keep coming out of summer break. So yeah, one can say it wasn't exactly relaxing the way I expected it to be. It was more on the lines of doing a bit of work and balancing out the monsoon break, more or less, just sitting at home and chilling for a while till it all starts again. Because it's a very intense season and we really have a championship on hand. So, yeah.
It's true. Now you've made the perfect segue to things that happen on track. Now, I'm sure when you rather landed into Zandvoort, were you expecting that McLaren to be as strong as they were?
Yeah.
You were.
I was one of the few. I was told, oh, it's going to be Max all the way and stuff. I was
Yeah.
like, no, I don't think this is one of the weekends Max is going to get Zandvoort. I thought, like, I remember a photographer friend with me, on the bus to, the track, and she was like, it's going to be Max, isn't it? And I'm like, nah, this looks like a Oscar Lando McLaren track. And I don't think this is going to be Red Bull's real ordeal because we knew they were going to heavily upgrade that McLaren. And Red Bull have been struggling and they've been trying to find performance. Also, they lacked FP running. There was no free practice, so that hampered everybody's understanding of being able to resolve their issues around their track and basic running not being there. We had a few wet sessions. There was a lot of gust, wind. We've had 4 different types of weather in 4 days. And I knew that that would favor McLaren because if there's any car on the track that suits all weather types, damp conditions, wet and dry, it is the McLaren. And it suits, they've brought a car that suits almost every track on the calendar. And we saw hints of that in Belgium. And now we are seeing it unfold. 22-second lead, maybe not, but I did expect. I mean, when I did my predictions, I almost expected Lando or Oscar. It was a given.
Okay, I was definitely one of those that was still hung up in the Red Bull camp because I was almost sure that the upgrades that they would bring would put them at an advantage in Zandvoort. Plus,
Mhm.
I also thought that Max Verstappen would have that home ground advantage. And at the end of the
Yeah,
day, all psychology. And I feel like that would have given him the edge to kind of overdrive
Mhm.
that car, even if it had
I
deficits on.
think yes, but when we saw FP1 and 2 and we were looking at the long runs, McLaren were a good 3 to 4 tenths up on the Red Bull. They were a good three to
Hence,
four tenths up on the Red Bull. And the long runs on tires, there was Red Bull did not have the competitive pace when it comes to race pace. In race trims, they were just falling behind. They had the qualifying pace, and yes, that home Grand Prix vibe and the crowds would have given Max that edge to fight for pole. Maybe added a tenth or two to his time, but I guess the reality was that I don't think this was going to be a Red Bull weekend to start off with. And Lando took pole, Lando took the win. So problem solved. There
So
you have your answer.
let's talk about Lando for a second there. I know that
Hmm.
there's been quite a like a bit of a celebration that's gone on this weekend after the fact that he's finally converted a pole to a win. But we
Hmm.
have to remind ourselves that his start wasn't as good. And he, in effect, got it back after he had lost it out
Yeah.
at the start. Right? What is it that he needs to kind of find now to make sure that every pole is a win and he isn't losing out to a Max Verstappen who's maybe it's some race and some track probably much faster than he is.
Well, I mean, look, he's fighting for his first championship. Max and Red Bull are not going to give it to him easily. He's one of those drivers who has raw pace, and now he has the car to compete for wins with. But the problem there is, I think people are criticizing him a bit too much. There was like, oh, he can't win. Then he got the win. Then he has only one win. There's Oscar, who's better. Unfortunately, it comes down to McLaren now choosing a number one at some point. That's where I see it go. Yes, he botched his start, and everybody was like, oh, no, not again. But I think he knew that he could take it back at some point or the other. And that confidence in his driving in Zandvoort really showed that yes, he's up there. But there is the pressure of your first title battle, and you're going up against Max, who's a generational talent, one of its kind, one of your closest friends too, and you want to do everything to make that happen. And this was a McLaren weekend. They are under pressure. They've thrown away enough of points over the 6 races. They've had the fastest car since Miami. No team on the grid is saying, oh, we need to level up to Red Bull standard. Now they're saying we need to level up to McLaren standard. We're 3 tenths away or 4 tenths away from a McLaren. Nobody's checking with Red Bull. So that is where it's evolving. And I guess when it comes to Lando, maybe Oscar also has a calmer mindset than Lando. But if you have that car being in place and when you're one with that car, that confidence is sometimes a bit different. Something like what we've seen Max do in the RB19. When he was at one with the car, he dominated with 22 seconds. So I think that this win of McLaren's with such a huge margin is almost a role reversal from what we saw in the RB19 at Zandvoort last year, where they beat them by 22 seconds order. And I particularly believe that it's not about um, trying to figure out what Red Bull got wrong. It's more about what McLaren has gone and got right. So Red Bull have probably developed that RB20. There have been all kinds of statements coming in from Max, Joss, Christian, and I've had the opportunity to talk to at least two out of three of them. But yeah, I mean, as far as Lando goes, the championship gap is still 70 points, and you have 9 races to go. But I think if they start with this momentum after summer break, it only gets better from here.
So when you mean it gets better, do you expect them to actually chase down Red Bull and give them an actual fight? At least in the constructors, you know that it's essentially one Red Bull versus two McLaren. So of course they're going to
Yes,
catch them at some point. But
yes.
in the drivers' championship, do you think that a Lando or an Oscar can actually influence that fight?
They'll have to choose one. And now on, I think every team, top to bottom, is going to have that one driver who's the sacrificial lamb in the race, one covering off the other, which we saw with Oscar. They kept him out late, got him in later, and then he couldn't even get past Leclerc. And I guess he spent a lot of time behind Russell. They are going to have to choose the number one. If they have both titles, they are going to have to target both. Or sooner or later, they might just have a Mercedes or a Ferrari breathing down their throat. And that doesn't help. You can have one contender like Red Bull, and that's easy to fight. And especially if you're in such a advantageous position. But then if you have two more, say a Mercedes or a Ferrari coming into the mix, then they can take points off you, and that doesn't help your cause. That helps Red Bull.
Fair enough.
So yeah,
Okay, so let's take a step back and zoom out the lens a little bit because I want to talk about the ones that finish behind your usual contenders, which is now McLaren and Red Bull Racing, which is
yeah.
Ferrari and Mercedes. So, what exactly is happening there? Now, that Leclerc podium, the P3 that he got in Zandvoort, nobody expected that. Even Ferrari didn't expect that. But here we are. Now, the the citizens of the internet have told that Leclerc clearly outdrove that car. But you've seen signs of improvement on that car.
Yeah.
What was
See,
the
now the Ferrari, it's a car. Obviously, they said like, okay, it'll be a miracle if we get a podium. I don't think that's what Charles said on Thursday. And they knew like they're about 2 or 3 tenths away from a McLaren. And I think both Carlos and Charles were able to keep the two Mercs at bay, which is George and Lewis. And what you're seeing here is basically they're good enough to keep Mercedes at bay, but then they're not good enough to say catch up on a Red Bull or a McLaren. So yes, somewhere Oscar's late pit stop and his I think Oscar was the main one in if you factor in P3 would have been his because he started third, but then he finished fourth. But when you look at Oscar's trajectory throughout the weekend, I think the qualifying he could have done better, maybe pushed Max to third. And then Ferrari wouldn't have had that chance, but Oscar went third in qualifying, and then he had a bad start, so he slipped down a few places. And then by the time that kind of set the tone of his race. So Ferrari were in a bit of a lucky position there, where they had, the situation, the race coming to them, and they were slightly better than what they expected to be in terms of race pace. They weren't as bad on the hard tire. So
that's
that's
one
where
that's
that's one way to put it. Even
yeah.
Carlos was able to keep George at bay. So I think both those drivers drove it well. And I do expect Ferrari to be extremely strong in Monza because that's one of those tracks where they have that's a home Grand Prix and so on and so forth. And they like looking good in Monza. I'd asked Charles if they're expecting updates anytime soon. He had said, no, I can't tell when, but I think they'll come in Monza because that Monza upgrade is the one they look forward to the most, particularly Ferrari.
So is it fair to say at this point, and I know that we're probably making a quick and probably unthought of statement, but it's just Zandvoort and we've just
Yeah.
begun the second half of the season. But is it good to say that Ferrari would now become the best of the rest?
Uh, eh, I I don't think I can conclude to that, but what I do see happening is there is a last bit of upgrades on the grid, which is called the Singapore upgrade, as everybody talks of it. Before you go to the flyaways, there's a one massive upgrade everybody brings in, and that's the last of the big development that happens. The only one with the best rate of development and who's done a better job, slightly better job than everybody else, has been McLaren. Now, the reason McLaren did not perform in the first 5 to 6 races is because they were behind. They were a little late on their upgrades. They were in the pipeline, but they weren't going to use them for the first 4 races or 5. And the moment you came to Miami, you've seen those roles reverse, where they've been on it and on it since. And that is, they're the only team who brought in this heavy upgrade into Zandvoort, and that will probably reflect throughout, and probably they add bits and bobs to it, but they also have more wind tunnel time than Red Bull, so they are there. But so does Mercedes, so does Ferrari. They have that extra wind tunnel time to counter, say, a Red Bull or each other. So I would expect Mercedes and Ferrari to be in a close fight for that third place. I don't know how Merc are going to improve it, but yes, that battle can get tight, and you never know. With this grid, it looks like everything is tightening up a bit. There is no best of
It's
the rest happening anymore. You
that
saw
is
a Gasly go up. You saw
uh,
in qualifying, you saw Albon. If Albon has been disqualified, you have like Williams in the play.
yeah.
And they will also, Alpine and Williams had gotten some good cars, good upgrades, sorry. So in my perspective, I think it would be hard to call anyone the best of the rest now, just yet. I think the best of the rest would be something like an Aston, or if Aston move up, nothing like it. No, but I think it would be rotate around an Alpine, an Aston, or something of that sort, or maybe an RB. You never know.
Hmm. All right, now let's move our focus to things off track because now that's been something that we've been talking about the entire season. I don't think in all these years of watching Formula One, there's been so much activity off the track as much as there's been
Hmm.
this year. But
Yeah.
let's still talk about it. Just as we're recording this, we got an update about Logan Sargeant being replaced.
Yeah.
And I know that this has been a rumor in the paddock for a while now. We were just it was more of a when than an if. And now
Hmm.
that the when has happened, I just want to know your
Yeah.
quick thoughts just as this drops.
So I think after Saturday in qualifying, the way this panned out was that there was Williams wanted to give him another chance and so on and so forth. And then the crash in qualifying didn't really help his cause. And that's where it soured between him and Vowles. And then there's that immediate thing, oh, we need to replace it to him immediately with immediate effect. And the story panned out such that we saw James Vowles visiting the Red Bull hospitality um, on Saturday evening. And by Sunday, it was a headline that they were looking out for, say, Logan Sargeant. They were looking out to replace him with, say, a Lawson. So I think Vowles had gone to inquire on the temporary availability, where they would have possibly thought of a situation where Red Bull loan him out. Then Mick Schumacher was being pushed by Toto Wolff. And then, yeah, the outcome, the driver they've replaced him with is like Colapinto, who's a F2 driver in an F2, in a current F2 season. Now, I'm not sure if the Sargent replacement is the best ordeal. If Schumacher had replaced Sargent, I would be saying the same thing, because the reason Schumacher didn't have a drive with Haas anymore is because of the number of crashes. And when you crash, it costs small teams a lot of money, a lot of it. And that's where this whole driver change has been, you know, this driver changes come in, because they had upgraded that Williams. You saw Albon in the top, but you weren't able to see Sargent there. And obviously, Colapinto is a rookie. So whether rookie replacing a proper F1 driver with a season under his belt is the right choice, maybe not. There was Dragovic they could have taken. Yeah, there were quite a few options. They had about 3 or 4 of them. So I'm not surprised with this option with F2.
Me too. Me too. I think, see, like you said, now you have a car that's potentially Q3able, right? Which has been
Hmm.
put into Q3 a bunch of times now. And would you risk that record? Not that you're setting something huge, but would you risk
Right.
that sort of momentum by throwing in a rookie with absolutely no experience under his belt versus somebody whom they could have loaned, for instance, Liam Lawson or
Yes, I think Lawson would have been the perfect choice. I don't think Schumacher was going to do much. But a rookie for Sargent, I don't know how that's going to work. I'm as surprised with it. I'm not a fan. I don't know what Vowles was thinking. Unless there was absolutely no availability of any other driver available. But it's quite hard
seems a
to
bit
say, because
unlikely.
yeah, it seems a bit unlikely. I wouldn't know till Thursday in Monza why they've chosen this particular driver, to be honest. So I'm as surprised, and it's only been 10 minutes before since we're recording this. So I think I understand. I'm in that place where I can understand why they've asked Sargent. I cracked that news on my Instagram, if I'm not wrong, and I'd explain why. But why they would take up Colapinto, that's something we'll only know in Monza.
Let's look at another driver who has made the headlines while we were away, which is uh, the Doohan family is now jumped in on the F1 scene. What are your thoughts? Is he the right
So
move
I
for?
think I have spoken on this show, or even in many other times. I think the most likely contender for Alpine was going to be Jack Doohan. Mick
Hmm.
Schumacher was pushing there, especially when Briatore came in, and there was also chatter of a possible, probably Alpine. Like I interviewed Joe Guan Yu on Thursday. I had an interview with him at Sauber. He was looking to extend his stint with Alfa Romeo and Audi. He was looking to get rehired, but so is Valtteri. And I think one of the choices of his was Alpine, and that is now that door is closed. I think he's a good lad. He's a good driver. And he's been their reserve driver. It brings in continuity where he knows the car, he knows what he's talking, and he knows what to do. And if you've looked at how it works, I mean, if you've seen him heard him on F1 TV and so on and so forth, he's really, really good. And he knows what he's talking. He has a good understanding of how to go about it. I think he's finished third in F2 last year. So it helps if you're in the top three in a F2 championship. It does help. He does have the merit to be there. Well, since, like you'd said before, since reigning F2 champions like Porsche and Drogovic haven't got seats on the grid, um, it's good not to win that title and then try for F1. Maybe midway it works. Behrman has got it from nowhere. If so, you have Ollie Behrman going there. But yeah, I mean, and speaking of rookie replacement, look at that. Like Behrman's nowhere in the title, in the F2 title, but he's replacing Magnussen. Magnussen has scored more points for Haas being a team player than anybody has.
If anybody's listening to this, especially
Yeah.
F2 drivers, do not win that title. You might
Yeah,
just
it
get
looks like it
an
won't get
F1.
in.
No, but it's nice. It's nice to see these the young blood kind of coming in because
Yeah.
with respect to Alpine especially, seeing the number of things that's not gone their way and the amount of instability that they've had over the last couple of years, I think this is probably the first thing that's had continuity within the Alpine
Yes.
ecosystem.
Obviously, what I'm hearing about that team is now that a lot of the Alpine Renault staff are asking them to reconsider the engine deal. Now, Briatore is come into play, and he also might have something to do with Doohan being there. Briatore possibly had a lot of influence into that because I remember he ended up in, I think he landed in Imola. Imola is when Briatore came into the paddock, and I was seeing, like, I've seen Doohan chatting him up. Basically, it's the Piranha Club at play, even with getting Doohan the drive. And when Briatore is in the picture, he thinks of his commissions and his own commercial interests everywhere. And the other problem Alpine have is they have performance-wise, they've brought in upgrades, and you saw it in Gasly's performance, obviously during qualifying and the race. But then they also have a whole organizational issue where I think Renault staff are now asking them to reconsider probably dropping Renault engines. They are, requesting Alpine or Renault to think of probably going in for their own engines because that means about 300 to 400 jobs getting affected at Viry-Châtillon, which is their engine headquarters in France. So there is going to be a lot of Alpine in the news and a lot of chaos coming out of that team. But I think it's getting clearer and clearer by the day that Briatore is there to put them in a position where they can be sold to another team and to put that whole scenario into effect.
So I don't know to what extent this news has been verified or true, but I happened to read a couple of days back that Briatore comes to the press and says that Alpine is not for sale. And the
Hmm.
fact those 300 to 400 jobs that you're talking about is somehow going to be retained within the factory, which I'm not sure how it's going to happen if they're not going to do the whole engine bit themselves or they're
Yes.
not going to say sell the team. So probably there's a good chance that they might just keep it intact.
Well, look, here's the thing. In France, going on a strike is their basic right. They strike in France. And if you're going to have 300 or 400 employees feel the threat that they might not have a job going forward, you are creating a lot of commotion. So maybe he's saying that to calm the atmosphere down, but it really remains to be seen what Briatore does. And if you've known the history of Briatore in this sport, Briatore can say a thing and do another. So I'm not going to go by that. I think what really will play out is maybe someone like Pierre or Jack have a team built around them. I know Pierre's trying very hard to build a whole team around him and become the face of Alpine, a French team. But whether how much French identity is left in that team come 2026 remains to be seen. And how much where they'll really shape up. I'm sure that's a headline that you can follow that'll carry on now in the second half of the season. Because I mean, coming into Zandvoort, most of the headlines are normally like a follow-up from Belgium. And we haven't had many. The real headlines this weekend have really been the performance side of things.
That is true. But let's talk about what's coming up though, because I think it's interesting because we've got what two? No, we've got a triple header, and then
Hmm.
there's almost a month's break again.
No, we
Uh,
have a double header and
we've
not
got a
triple.
double header. No, towards the end of the season we've got a triple header, but before that
Yes,
we've
end
got
of
a
the
month
season we do.
break,
Yeah,
right? And then before that we've got almost two double headers, if I'm not wrong.
yeah.
So it's a pretty packed. back-to-back super packed season in its sense. So what you're essentially saying is, one, you don't have time for major upgrades except for when we do the flyaway races, the Singapore
Yes,
upgrades, which is,
yes.
um, and then the upgrade before that would have come now in Zandvoort. So you're looking at
Some would have
smooth
brought it now,
performances,
yes. Like I think McLaren brought theirs now, and they're just
right?
going to
So
carry on with it.
you're probably going to see similar performances all the way through Singapore, and then something else shifts
Yes,
after
I
Singapore.
think where Red Bull could have gone wrong is they bought their upgrades in bits and bobs and spread it out because there is a cost cap in effect and they can't flout that anymore. There is a wind tunnel penalty, time penalty, and that's going to affect them massively when you look at the rate of development they have. So they're going to have to only find solutions in what they have. What Red Bull did do in Monza, there's something they couldn't test around, and was that they tried two different spec floors for both their drivers. They used two different specs, an earlier spec and an improved spec
When
to
did
see
they
what
do this? They did this in
they
Zandvoort.
did it in Monza. And what they weren't able to do is because of the lack of running in free practice, they weren't able to test it properly as they wanted it, test it as well as they wanted it to, or, do the play around with it a bit to optimize it to its best. So
Wait, I
what
think you're talking
we,
about Imola, right? Not Monza.
Monza,
They
they did get a one new floor and one old floor, and they were like trying two different specifications. So it's a very tiny update. It's just experiments by Red Bull at the moment. And we obviously, the real data that they have, which they say there were a lot of positive signs, was the 144 laps driven by between both the drivers. And the main bit that I think they're relying on is the data they've got from this particular race. And when it comes to getting more upgrades, maybe Red Bull bring, another tiny update of it in Monza. And the real statement I'd say for Red Bull was that Max said that something's been wrong with the car for a while now, and I've been saying it. So he's been very vocal, and he was the one who said it's not just the constructors at threat, even the drivers will go at this stage. And I asked Christian Horner that. Then now roles have reversed, and he was like, "Yes, there was one time when Stefano almost told us to slow down at the beginning of the season, and it's just a testimony to the ever-changing landscape of Formula One." But the other bit that he also admitted is if the next 9 races go like this, yes, they could lose maybe at least one title and another one by the end of it. And from where I see it, if they don't turn it around and are able to at least consistently finish second, they are going to be. I was expecting the title to, you know, I'm expecting the title lead, at least in the constructors, to shift by Baku or Singapore.
that's very cool. So this brings us
Yeah.
to our favorite bits, which is talking about what's going to happen or predict what's going to happen the next race.
Yeah,
So
and like you said, another point I'd like to add with your upgrades bit is I think different teams have approached it differently. Small teams operating depending on their budgets and depending on what kind of development rate they're on or their development plan, they're bringing it at different points. Like Haas brings upgrades sometimes they bring it to Austin when nobody necessarily brings a real upgrade to their car. They'll bring like performance changes, like, the big wing, small wing, and so on and so forth, which are basically track specific, which keep rotating all year round. But nobody brings in a massive upgrade or something at that point of the year, but has to sometimes. So it's going to be interesting. It might be a bit different throughout the grid, how that is, what their strategies are going on forward.
you kind of hit the nail on the head in the previous question, right? Which is that
Yeah.
we are in a cost cap era and you can't flaunt what you can do. And you don't want to be showing off too much, or you don't want to be bringing everything all at once and then suffering through the year. So it kind of depends on how well you're able to
Yeah.
phase out everything in a way, even if it's bits and bobs.
Hmm.
Clearly, some teams haven't done too well with it, but I'm sure some teams can't afford to do anything more than that. So
Yeah.
that's also there. So what are your predictions for Monza?
Well, in Monza, I expect like it to be, like I said earlier, it'll be very tight between Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull, or maybe even Mercedes comes into play because Merc have made a step ahead. And
Mhm.
that's what people are forgetting. I think Red Bull has recognized that it's not change of floors that really gives them performance. They have recognized that the place where rival teams have made gains is the front wing. That remains an area where everybody is really developing and, bringing in all that more downforce there. So Monza is a high speed circuit. You're going to see like Williams surge through maybe. I'd expect maybe if Aston Martin bring in something, I'm not sure if they do, but maybe if they factor in, you could see them come in with something worthy of a 10th or two. You could see maybe Red Bull try and improve from where they are. But I think out and out, the pole fight, I would put a Ferrari versus McLaren maybe, and some Red Bull somewhere in the mix.
I'm gonna give the world's most amateur take, and this is a very netizen take, which is that so far this year,
Hmm.
we've got Lewis winning his home race, Charles winning his home race. So I just have a stupid odd feeling that Ferrari might just do it at home. So
How
it
many
might.
years has it been since they've won a race? Last year, were they won it, right?
Where? In Monza.
Yeah, who won Monza last year? Max?
Last year?
It's been a
Yeah,
while
must be
since they've
Max.
won
What did
Monza.
he not win?
Yeah.
It must have been
So,
Max.
I mean, you don't have an Italian driver on the grid, but yes, the Tifosi might just add a 10th or two more what Ferrari can't bring it through their upgrades. Yeah, that just might add time to both Carlos and Charles. So they're nowhere in the Drivers' Championship. Sooner or later, PS3 will move up in the
Yeah.
drivers because he's only 12 points behind Charles.
Charles.
So I would factor in a PS3 too.
That'll
I'm
be
not
fun.
forgetting
What
him.
to do? Yeah,
Hmm.
I really like
And
Piastri.
Monza is one of those tracks where it's really a mixed bag. Like you
Yeah.
remember the time De Vries got a point and that got him a F1 drive full time. So it's one of those where the underdogs shine, or you have these oddballs come into play. So Monza I expect it to be like really exciting. Monza, Singapore, they tend to have that, the qualifying does all of it. And yeah, I'd expect some of them to really do well there. I hope it's not a processionish one because if you look at the Zandvoort Grand Prix, it's after the pit stops that the real mayhem started. Though there were a lot of overtakes, but not enough. We had four cars overtaking K-Mag.
Oh, that was
We had, yeah,
it was so sad to watch. You could just see all the
yeah.
cars overtaking him from either side. This guy was just stuck. But
But I think
yeah.
he backed them up in the back, trying to help Nico,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
then
really?
he
You
just
think
gave
so?
up. Yeah, he mentioned that to us. He has to do his bit to be the team player.
Oh
But
my
I guess
God.
Nico fell out of the points, so that really didn't help much. He was just outside in P11.
He's a good guy. But anyway, one thing I wanted to, ask you before you signed off and we signed off this episode. You've been to Monza a couple of times now, right?
Yeah.
What would be like your guide to watch a Monza Grand Prix? If somebody
Okay,
had to go
so
as a fan, what would be the best place to sit and
This
watch that?
this double header is one that I don't like missing in Europe because if you want to like I mean when you go to Belgium and Budapest, you're not necessarily the atmosphere is not as electric. Um this one and Monza are the ones where even you're pumped up because it's so electric and the atmosphere is so good. So I expected if I had to give a guide to Monza, I'd say like eat a lot of food in Milan. I love doing that. Go to the Domo. Ferrari always does an event on Wednesdays. There is a lot to do around Milan as a city, and obviously Como is not very far. I know a lot of friends who stay at Como and drive it up to Monza. Monza is just surreal, and it's going to be very, very, very hot. So factor that in into the race predictions also. It's almost 20 degrees more than here. Here
Jeez,
it's like 17 to
20
20. There it's like
degrees.
30s. It's the mid 30s. So
Oh,
the track temperature would at least be 20 degs more than what they experienced here.
mm.
So
But
if I had to give like Monza, I think if you're a Ferrari fan, you really enjoy Monza. It's very similar to Imola. You enjoy the Tifosi at its best. Only thing is in Monza, I mean, in Imola, you get a lot of Bolognian cuisine, like it's in Bologna. And here you would get a lot of, I think Milanese cuisine. And I love food, I love culture, I love art and music and things like that. So I love going around Milan city and just, having a good time, enjoying lovely things. So yes, and as far as the Grand Prix goes, I guess it's one of the oldest tracks. The one change will be they're going to change the main building, and also they've upgraded the track. They've changed the tarmac, few curves, and a few corners might have some changes. So there's a lot to look forward to, and it's a beautiful walk through Monza Park.
Yeah, two things. One is I think we need to start putting out a travel guide, the TPPRD travel guide with you, so that you can just list out
Yes,
all the things and places. Oh, that'll be
yes.
so much fun. And second is
I'm
we
still on my
have to
travel guide.
be.
I'm still completing my itinerary for Amsterdam because I'm still in Amsterdam. Everybody's either gone back to England, and I
Mhm.
think the Japanese, myself, Australian journalists, and Asians, our side of the world. There are just a few, 6 or 7 of us in the same vicinity. So we're still in Amsterdam, and I yesterday I went to the city and had a lovely dinner, and yeah, today I'm going again and getting to see more Amsterdam because I really love it here.
We got to do this. We'll think of a travel guide-ish thing.
Yes,
Because
and
you
by
haven't
the way,
seen
there are a lot of Indian fans
where
at
in Monza,
Zandvoort
in
because
Zandvoort.
of the ticket mess up. Yeah, there was a lot of resale happening with the tickets, and a lot of the tickets were returned. If you heard, like the ticket sales weren't very great this year. Last year, it was the number of attendees were lesser. I think one reason, primary reason, is I think the promoter was messed up, and the other is that you had the Euro finals and Olympics, so people have kind of run out on their travel budget, and it wasn't as full as last year. But we had a lovely concert with Armin van Buuren and La
Oh,
Fuente, who I really like after I saw him play on the grid last year. So I made sure I went for that one. But this is one of those races where, people are dancing in their rain ponchos and crowds of huge crowds. I mean, in crowds of by the hundreds. So it's really lovely here.
perfect. With that, I think this gives us the perfect time to wrap things up, and then we'll catch
Yeah.
you right after Imola.
Yes.
All right. See you. Have a great time.